USA is the home of serial killers. A killer is defined as serial when they have killed 3 or more people in various attacks. Of the prolific serial killers known around the world, 74% were born and raised in the USA.
Welcome, everybody, to Murder with Mo, the true crime podcast that covers serial killer cases in the USA. I'm your host, Mo, and I'm on the case today. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. When you think of clowns, typically one of two types come to mind. The silly songs, whimsical voice, goofy behavior, and colorful type is the one we usually see at children's parties that bring a smile to all of our faces. While the other type can be creepy, deranged, sinister, having a maniacal laugh with tormenting behavior that haunts children's dreams and every waking moment. Today's case focuses around a clown that had two sides to it. They portrayed themselves as the first type of clown mentioned, but behind closed doors, deep down inside, they were every bit of the second type of clown, taking it even a step further in becoming murderous. John Wayne Gacy, a name that still rings bells 30 years after his execution for his crimes in the Chicago, Illinois area. Some of you listening right now may pose the question, well, who is John Wayne Gacy, Mo? Gacy was a serial killer and rapist that murdered at least 33 teenage boys in Cook County located in Chicago, and he buried their bodies beneath his house. It was unsuspected that he could ever commit such heinous acts because of who he was amongst the people that knew him. He founded a successful construction business and was an active member in his community, and was often found, you guys, lending a helping hand to those in need of it. He appeared to be a well-rounded guy, intelligent, kind, helpful, and successful. It looked as if Gacy had life figured out. But little did anyone know his past was going to catch up with him, and his need to kill would surpass his need to maintain the perfect suburban image he portrayed. Gacy's first sexual experience took place between the ages of 6 and 10 when a teenage girl would undress Gacy, and to keep things censored for the podcast, we'll say that she would play inappropriately with him while he was undressed. Gacy continued to be sexually abused through his adolescence. Now, after being sexually abused, there was a change in Gacy's mindset. I mean, there's only so long that something abnormal will become normal to you if it keeps on happening. And instead of always being a victim to the abuse, he decided to turn into the abuser. By 1968, Gacy was married to his wife, Marlon Myers, and had welcomed 2 beautiful kids into the world. They lived an average American life and drew little to no attention to themselves. But Marlon and her children's lives became abruptly uprooted this year as Gacy was accused of sexually assaulting 2 teenage boys. He aggressively denied having anything to do with the assault. The show that he put on, claiming that this was an absolute outrage, was actually quite convincing, even leading people in the community to believe that the accusations were completely ludicrous. Even though he was able to convince the community he was innocent, the jury deemed that he was not and found him guilty on both charges, sentencing him to 10 years in prison. Now, almost immediately upon conviction, Marlon filed for divorce from Gacy, and within the same year, he lost his freedom, his wife, and custody of his children. He was, though, able to regain his freedom sooner than most would think. Because of his good behavior and, I guess, model prisoner status, Gacy only served 18 months of his 10-year sentence before being released on parole, which is absolutely ridiculous. But pedophiles with no self-control like Gacy couldn't stay out of trouble for long. Soon after his release from prison, Gacy returned in 1971 when a teenage boy came forward claiming that he was picked up from the Chicago Greyhound bus station and brought into Gacy's house where Gacy forced him into sexual acts. But unfortunately, Gacy was never actually prosecuted for this crime because the teenage boy making the accusations never showed up during the trial. The charges were dropped and Gacy was able to continue on as a free man. By the end of 1971, Gacy started his construction company called PDM Contractors, which grew successful and exceeded financial expectations. He also reconnected with an old high school girlfriend named Carol Huff, and the two quickly became engaged. To finish off the year, Gacy bought a house on 8214 West Somerdale Avenue in Norwood Park, Illinois. Things, looked as though they were on the up and up for Gacy. It seemed that love, positivity, and success were flowing for him at this time. But again, I say, men like Gacy can never stay out of trouble for too long. They always have a way of finding themselves letting those pedophilic urges get the best of them. On January 3rd, 1972, Gacy made a drastic change in his actions. He went from sexually assaulting minors to full-blown murder. Timothy McCoy was a 16-year-old boy traveling on the Greyhound bus home to Nebraska with a stop in Chicago. While at this stop, of course, he met John Wayne Gacy. After conversation ensued, Timothy was lured into Gacy's home and the two engaged in acts of sex. The following morning, something snapped in Gacy. He woke up and grabbed a butcher knife, you guys, and repeatedly stabbed McCoy to death. Gacy stated that this is when he realized that he received almost a sexual gratification from killing. He said that death was the ultimate thrill, and Gacy effectively used his construction business to his advantage to satisfy the need for that thrill. He typically would hire young men or high school students to work for him, and he would often proposition them for sex, almost always using the threat of violence in order to get what he wants. Now, after Timothy McCoy's murder on July 31st, 1975, Gacy set his sights on John Butkovich, who was an 18-year-old PDM employee. Gacy invited Butkovich to his house one evening, promising that the two of them would discuss the late payments that Gacy owed Butkovich from the last 2 weeks. How you late paying your employees, bruh? Anyways, once Butkovich got to his house, he almost immediately became intoxicated due to the large amounts of alcohol that Gacy was giving him. Once he was drunk enough, Gacy convinced him to be a part of a magic trick that he had to do during his clown routines. And during this magic trick, he slapped a pair of cuffs on Butkovich's wrists and then began strangling Butkovich, killing him almost instantly. Now, his body was not found right away, so to those who don't know what happened, he was filed as a missing person. Butkovich's parents suspected Gacy was behind his disappearance as they knew he was going to visit him the night of his vanishing. His parents urged the police to investigate Gacy for this disappearance, but their complaints fell upon deaf ears. So by 1975, Gacy began freely increasing his frequency of needing sex with young men and, of course, his tendencies to commit murder. There was a surge of disappearances of young men in the area, and most of them were actually connected to Gacy. It's really a shock that police weren't able to put this together sooner, that this man was killing and taking these people. Along with the connections of young men disappearing, circling back to Gacy, there were a couple of young men that also accused Gacy of rape during this time. So he was brought in and questioned by police about the disappearances, but there was no hard evidence to convict him of the rape and disappearances. The evidence was circumstantial, especially because there were no bodies being found. And without a missing body, I mean, there's just really nothing that they could go off of. It really turned into a he said, she said, because there was also no evidence of the rapes that he was being accused of. So again, he was cleared of any suspicion. What investigators didn't know is that they needed a search warrant of his house in order to secure the evidence they needed to successfully convince Gacy of the crimes. So why, you guys may ask, did they need to actually get into his house and property to have a smoking gun case? Gregory Gacy is a 17-year-old short-term employee of Gacy. He told his parents that one day Gacy had ordered him to dig trenches in the crawl space under his home. The trenches dug in the crawl space he had built is where he was able to actually store the bodies of his victims without being detected by the authorities. Now, the parents weren't suspecting anything unusual with the request, as Gacy was a construction worker and assumed that it had to do with something like a construction job. It wasn't until Gregory actually went missing one night on December 12th, 1976, and some of his belongings were actually found in Gacy's home that his parents realized the request to dig the crawl space was a very odd one to make. And they made this puzzling request known onto the investigators handling his missing persons case. When Gacy was questioned on the whereabouts of Gregory, he told detectives that had confided to him that he planned to run away from home and was very unhappy with his own life. So he more than likely was just on the run from his home life in his hometown and wasn't necessarily missing. He was able to sum up his belongings being in his house to the simple fact that Gregory and him were close and he was an employee of his, so there were times he would leave his stuff by accident with him. Now, since Gacy was evading the law and able to smoothly talk his way out of almost every single accusation that had come by him, there was an arrogance overcoming Gacy at this point. He had the confidence that he was above the law. So he continued to kill, taking the lives of several more victims during this time period. Gacy became so confident, you guys, in his ability to avoid being detained by police that he even left one of his victims alive. In late 1977, Robert Donnelly was a 19-year-old college student that Gacy abducted from a Chicago bus stop. Using the usual rules of getting these young men to trust him and believe he only wanted to lend a helping hand, Gacy took a willing Robert Donnelly to his house. Now, Robert's thoughts of Gacy being a kind, well-mannered, sweet man that just wanted to help quickly changed as the true monster Gacy was came out. While Robert was in the company of Gacy, he repeatedly raped and tortured this young man, dunking his head underwater until he would pass out, and he would fire blank rounds from a gun at Donnelly so it would mimic that of execution. The pain was so excruciating and the torturing became overwhelming to the point that he was begging, you guys, begging Gacy to just put him out of his misery and kill him. But murdering Robert would take away that sadistic gratification that Gacy always got from torture. So instead, when Gacy was done having his form of fun with him, he let Robert go, but not without threatening him to keep what happened between the two of them a secret and to not go to the police or else he would be dealt with. Robert said the hell with that and went to the police. So once again, Gacy was back in the interrogation room being questioned about his actions pertaining to the night he picked up Robert. Gacy, once again though, was able to convince them that the sexual acts were consensual, that they were engaging in role play in the bedroom, that they were acting out sex slavery fantasies. What the hell kind of? Is that a thing, y'all? I've never done that, so I don't know. And like clockwork, the detectives believed Gacy freed him of any other suspicions. Having been on a killing spree for almost 6 years, in 1978, Gacy was starting to have trouble disposing of the bodies. I mean, the crawl space under his house had no more room left to add. Do you know how many bodies he had to put under there? That is insane. So you'd think that there was no space left for him to safely dispose of bodies, that he would take a beat and methodically plan out what he was going to do next. But those pedophilic and psychosexual urges wouldn't allow for Gacy to come up with a plan. Instead, he continued in his usual prowl of finding young men to murder and began dumping the bodies into the Plains River off of Interstate 55. Now, on the morning of December 11th, 1978, a 15-year-old named Robert Peast told his mom he was on his way to meet a man that was offering him a potential construction job. Hours turned into the whole day passing by, and then the day turned into the evening without his mother hearing any word from Robert. So, of course, she grew worried as Robert never returned home, and she filed a missing persons report. During the report, his mother disclosed to police that he was meeting with a man for a construction job, and the man's name was, of course, John Wayne Gacy. Someone overheard, actually, the phone conversation between Gacy and Peast about meeting up for the construction job, and this person also gave Gacy's name to the police officers that were working the case. Now, this case was a little bit different than the other ones, as it was special to the officers investigating it because Robert attended the same high school and was friends with the lead investigator's son that was on the case. So the case became, needless to say, very personal for him, and he took the report seriously and investigated Gacy thoroughly, as everybody should have. When Gacy was brought in for questioning, yet again, he claimed that he had no contact with Robert. He never showed up for their meeting the day he went missing. But this time around, Gacy was not going to be able to talk his way out of being a prime suspect. Authorities launched a full investigation into this missing persons case and actually obtained a search warrant for Gacy's property. There, they discovered some very unsettling items in his possession. These items included police badges, a pistol, hypodermic needles, and pornographic films of young boys. Upon searching his house, police also found a receipt that belonged to Robert Peast from earlier in the day when he went missing. So this completely negated Gacy's claim that he never met up with Peast that day. The findings of this receipt amped the police to do an even more thorough search of his entire property. And guys, the findings from this comprehensive search stunned the police, the community. It stunned everybody because it was sick. There were several trenches in the crawl space beneath Gacy's house, and every single crawl space was filled to the top with bodies. Police found a substantial amount of buried bodies underneath Gacy's property, and needless to say, he was placed under arrest and charged with the murders of the bodies found. In 1979, his house was taken apart and searched from the top to the bottom in efforts to find more bodies on the property. Now, what was found during the demolition of Gacy's house was beyond disturbing to the point that many said if there was a devil living on earth, he would live in this house right here. The demolition found an additional 3 bodies, and from what they discovered from their initial search, making the total unearthed bodies 29 bodies. I don't even understand how you fit 29 people beneath your house. That's crazy. With the overwhelming evidence against Gacy, of course he confessed and led police to another 4 bodies that he dumped in the Des Plaines River when his trenches got too full. This brought the total bodies found at the hands of Gacy to be 33. And Gacy's trial started on February 6, 1980, but Gacy's best defense after confessing to the murders was a not guilty plea due to reason of insanity. And for some reason, the court allowed for Gacy to be remitted to a mental health facility to undergo countless hours of psychological testing. Gacy tried to self-diagnose himself as having multiple personality disorder, claiming that there was a split in his mind. One side was like the fun-loving clown that we talked about, everybody, but the other side was the crazy clown that he named Bad Jack. He claimed that Bad Jack was the side that came out during the murders. He said that Bad Jack despised homosexuals and viewed them as like the scum of the earth. So after long hours of psychological testing, Gacy's day in court was finally seen. The prosecution made a strong argument that Gacy was completely sane and in his right state of mind while committing the murders. They harped on the fact that there was a methodical procedure in each murder that Gacy followed to a T in order to ensure that he wasn't going to be caught. You're not mentally insane if you could think in your mind knowing this is wrong and try not to get caught. It's not possible. So he knew what he was doing was wrong, and due to the premeditation of each murder, there was no doubt that he was acting in his best interest even while under duress. So trial lasted only a month, and the jury was sent to deliberate. The deliberation was very short, and he was found guilty on 33 counts of murder and sentenced to death. He was sent to serve his time until he was scheduled to be put to death at the Minrad Correctional Center. Now, during his time at Minrad, he exhausted himself in attempts to appeal his conviction to the U.S. Supreme Court. He offered a different story to what happened during the course of the murders and maintained that he was actually innocent, despite the fact that he confessed. Like, how do you say you did something and then turn around and be like, no, I didn't really do it. I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, what? In October of 1993, Gacy used his last appeal, and the Supreme Court threw it out almost as fast as it was heard. Before the ink dried, they said no. He was then set to be executed on May 10th, 1994. Now, when May 10th came, Gacy was transferred to Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. Gacy remained adamant that he was innocent for the crimes and that they were killing the wrong person and that the person who actually did the murders was still walking free, yada, 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 yada. So he claimed that the families, friends, and loved ones also of the victims would not find peace or comfort as the state was wrongfully murdering him. The nerve of this man. Gacy was executed on May 10th, 1994 by lethal injection. It's been reported by a few that his last words were, "Kiss my you-know-what." And that, everybody, does conclude today's story of the serial killer known in the USA as the Killer Clown. Thank you guys for joining me today, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on those post notifications. We will see you next time for more Murder with Mo. I'm Mo, and I'm signing off the case today. Bye-bye.